Well, the ACT has become the first jurisdiction in Australia to change the legal status of animals from property to sentient beings in their own right. The new laws cover neglecting to provide food, water and shelter for pets, and also criminalise any confinement that restricts an animal's movement, including farm animals. Professor Danielle Sellermeyer is research lead of the Multi-Species Justice Project at the University of Sydney, and she joins me now. Danny, thanks for joining us in the studio this afternoon. Before we look at the changes to these laws, for those not across the idea of an animal being a sentient being, what does that mean and what is the evidence to support that?
Well, sentience basically means the capacity to feel, to have emotions, to feel pain, to feel pleasure, to feel excitement, to feel fear. And over the last 50 years, there's been an enormous amount of research on different types of animals, from what we call higher animals like chimpanzees, but also bats, pigs, farm animals, to show that they have a much more complex range of emotions than we had previously thought. So animals not only feel pain and fear, but also have memory of particular sorts of places that they go to, have the ability to plan. And this research is really a growing field. So we're moving from a position where science basically thought, since the Renaissance, treated animals as things, as little machines. So we talked about animals have instincts, but humans have behaviours, to really coming to understand that the line, that massive gap between humans and non-human animals, is really much more fluid than we thought it was, and a lot of the capacities that we have thought were unique to human beings, including the capacity to feel, are also experienced by a range of animals, by all animals, but to different degrees and in different ways.
Okay, before we look at the laws that are coming into effect, what are the current laws? Because up until now, the main distinction has been really regarding personhood.
Right, so the way in which a being is recognised by the law matters enormously. So if we think about something like women, that women were at one time in various jurisdictions not recognised as subjects in their own rights. They were appendages to their husbands or fathers. And so the fullest recognition before the law is a person, and a person with a range of rights. So right now, human beings are the only ones generally who are recognised as persons with a full range of rights, although corporations are also recognised as persons with particular types of rights. So the push has been to move animals from the category of being pure property or thing that we can move around the way that we want to having them enter a category where some of their rights can be recognised. Now, the fullest case of that would be full recognition as persons. In the United States, there has been a great deal of advocacy to try and get recognition of particular types of animals. Elephants, orcas and chimps in particular recognised as persons in US courts. At the moment...
And is the idea behind that because then you can't keep them in captivity?
Right. So the fact that you're a person doesn't mean that you have all rights. It means you have particular types of rights. Right. So the rights that they're fighting for those animals in the States at the moment are rights of habeas corpus. So not to be able to be kept in captivity without any type of answerability. Mm-hmm. Then once that's recognised, we might be able to move on to other types of rights that would be appropriate to those animals. So sentience falls short of full personhood, but it's a recognition that this isn't just a thing. This is a being that is the site of its own subjectivity, is one way of putting it.
Well, let's have a look at some of the laws that are looking at being introduced here. The fines are quite large. $4,000 for owners who don't exercise their dogs for up to 24 hours. $16,000 for not restraining a dog in a moving car. That means no dog in the back of the ute tray, I guess, anymore. Are these quite harsh penalties?
I think the severity of a penalty depends on how one judges the crime. The first thing I'd say is, as I understand it, the law is going to come in 6 months. and there'll be an educative process so people have an opportunity to understand what their responsibilities are under the law. And we can think of law as playing two types of functions. There's the imposition of the penalties, but then there's what we call the expressive function of law. So by saying something like, if you confine an animal so that it can't move in a way that is just a basic need of that animal and the animal's going to suffer, or if you place the animal in a moving vehicle so that it is at enormous risk, as we know, because we put seatbelts on ourselves and our kids, then what we're doing when we place fines on those acts is we're expressing the fact that that is causing harm to a sentient being. I think the role of the penalties is to say these are serious crimes. These aren't things that you're just going to pay off through some minor act of reparation, but these are things that we actually need to take seriously in the same way as we take care of persons seriously.
So what about some of the challenges to these rules? I mean, how are we going to police someone not walking their dog for 24 hours? And what are some of the other challenges that you see with these laws? So
it's a really important question, because one of the weaknesses of welfare laws in Australia is that they're generally policed. The policing is really not sufficient to be able to oversee that the behaviours or that the laws are complied with. And the RSPCA has quite limited resources to be able to check up on people complying with the law. So if the law is going to be properly enforced, there's going to have to be proper resourcing of the RSPCA and welfare organisations to be able to oversee it. So I assume that the main function of the law is going to be this expressive function, and that's to say that animals are sentient under the law in itself doesn't do anything. It's not like if you go around and say, well, they're not sentient, you're going to get fined, right? It's about us recognising that animals are other beings with whom we share the planet.
So just finally, should this idea of a sentient being apply to animals that have an economic value? So say, that are farmed, that are used for someone's livelihood?
The fact that there's an economic interest in an animal does not mean that the animal's not sentient. If we choose not to recognise the sentience of the animal because we have an economic interest in not doing so, that is the definition of an unethical act. We might say that animal is sentient and we don't care about the sentience because we want to make money out of it, but I think we need to keep those two distinct. So we recognise the sentience and then we decide what our ethical responsibilities are around that.
Well, I don't have a dog that I can go home and walk, but I do have a cat I can go home and cuddle, which I'll go and do. Danielle Selamai, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, a Gold Coast teenager is about to get his big break in motorsport at the Bathurst 1000. 16-year-old Bailey Hall will